Hi guys, in the previous tutorial I showed you how to make a combo chart. In this one I'm gonna show you how to format it to make it look like this, like this, like this one, or like this one. So let's get started. So for the first design, the first thing that we want to do is to change the axis title. So we're gonna select our chart. We're gonna click it, and then where it says chart design, we're gonna look for the chart layout section, and we're gonna look for the add chart element. And here we're gonna look for the axis titles, and we're gonna click on primary horizontal. Then we're gonna do the same for the primary vertical. And then we're gonna do the same thing again for the secondary vertical. So as you can see, now I have the axis titles in all of my three axes: the left axis, the right axis, and the horizontal axis. So now I want to change the titles of them. So in the horizontal axis, I'm gonna type in here date, and I'm gonna hit enter. And there we go. For the left axis, we just need to select the axis title. We don't need to delete what it says. We just have to replace it with our own title. So for this one, I'm gonna type in here sales, and I'm gonna hit enter. Then I'm gonna go to the right axis, and I'm gonna type in here profit margin. Okay, so now I have the axis titles. Now I want to give this chart a name, so I'm gonna click where it says chart title, and I'm gonna rename it to sales and profit margin. Now we want to change the default font for this chart, so I'm gonna select all of my chart right here, and I'm gonna go to the home menu, and I'm gonna look for a new font. I'm gonna look in here for the Arial one, because it's a professional looking font. Now my chart is displaying everything in this Arial font. Now the third thing we want to do is to remove these grid lines in here. Sometimes they're useful, but when you have a lot of data, and in the case of combo charts where we have two metrics and we have the data labels of all of them, and then we have a right and left axis, it gets a little confusing to see all of the information at once. So we're gonna go back to the chart design, and we're gonna go back to the chart layouts, and where it says add chart element, we're gonna look for the option that says grid lines. And as you can see, I have the primary major horizontal selected. So I'm gonna click to unselect it, and now my grid lines are gone. So now my chart looks a little bit more clean. So now I want to change the data labels, since it gets a little confusing to see them in here. So I want to select them. I can click any of my data labels in here. I'm gonna click on this one, and as you can see, all of them are selected. And I'm gonna right click, and I'm gonna click on format data labels option. Okay, and I'm gonna get this right panel right here. So where we have these label options, I'm gonna look for the label position section, and I'm gonna click on outside end. So now my labels are at the end of each bar, but still these data labels can get a little bit confusing with the other data labels of the line chart. So what we want to do is to go up to the text options in here, and I'm gonna click it. And I'm gonna look for this option where it says text box. I'm gonna click it. So as you can see here, I have an option that says custom angle. So we can change the angle of the data labels. So if I click in here in the down arrow, and I'm gonna take it up to 90 degrees. Okay, maybe at 45 it looks good. But let's assume that we want it at 90 degrees. So when we reach the 90 degrees, you can see that now my data labels are rotated at 90 degrees. which makes the chart look a little bit better. So now the next thing we want to do is to change the color of the bars. So I'm gonna click on any point in the bars, okay, and still on my right pane over here, I'm gonna look for the fill and line, and I'm gonna click it. I'm gonna open up the fill section, and I'm gonna look for the solid fill, and I'm gonna choose a green color in here. I'm gonna select this one, and now my bars are displayed in green. I can make this look a little bit better by adding a shadow. So I'm gonna go to the effects section up here, and I'm gonna expand the shadow option. Okay, so where it says presets, I'm gonna select the inner right shadow over here, inside right. And as you can see now, my chart looks a little bit better. So now the next thing I want to do with my bars is to go to the series options. So I'm gonna move the gap width down here. I'm gonna leave it as 44 just to see how it looks. And now the bars are looking a little bit wider, so it looks a little bit better for me. So I'm gonna leave it like that. And now I'm gonna change the line. So I want to select the line, I want to click any point of the line, and still on my right pane, I'm gonna click on the fill and line option. I'm gonna select solid line, and I'm gonna select this color. But now I want to do another thing with my line. I want to add markers to them, to every single point. So as you can see here, we have a line and marker options. So I'm gonna select the marker option, and I'm gonna open up here where it says marker options, and I'm gonna select the built-in, and I can choose in here the type of marker that I want. In this case, I'm gonna select this one, okay, and I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. I'm gonna change it to size 6. Okay, so now as you can see, I have my markers in here. So the last thing I want to do is to change the color of them. So I'm gonna click on solid fill, and I'm gonna pick this dark blue. Okay, and it looks a little bit better now. And for the last thing, I'm gonna remove the border for this marker. So I'm gonna click here on no line. Okay, and we're done with our first design. So now we're gonna start with our second design, and I want to start with the same steps that I did on the last one. So I'm gonna select the chart, I'm gonna go up to the chart design, I'm gonna go to the chart layouts, and I'm gonna click on add chart element, and I'm gonna select the axis title, the primary horizontal. I'm gonna do this for the primary vertical, and I want to do this for the secondary vertical, and I'm gonna rename the axis titles. So I'm gonna click here date, I'm gonna rename this to sales, I'm gonna rename this to profit margin, and I'm gonna change the chart title to sales and profit margin. So now I want to go back to the chart design, and where it says chart styles, you can see that I have several styles in here to choose from. So I'm gonna select the number 6 to select the dark theme. So now it has this dark look. So I'm gonna change the font of this chart. I'm gonna go back to the home menu, and I'm gonna type in here the font that I want, which in this case is gonna be this Sego UI. You can pick any font you want, it's just that I like this one, and I'm gonna hit enter. Okay, so now my chart is starting to look the way I want. The next thing we want to do is to change the colors of the line and the bar. So I'm gonna go back to the chart design, and where it says chart styles, you can see that there's a palette in here which says change colors. I'm gonna look for the 4th option in the monochromatic scale. So I'm gonna select it, And now I have this gold looking chart. Now I want to remove the grid lines, and as we saw before, we go back to the add chart element and we go to the grid lines and we click on primary major horizontal to uncheck it. Okay, so now the next thing that I want to do is to change the legend, because I want this legend to be on the right. So I'm gonna click here on the legend and I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna hit on format legend, and I'm gonna have in this legend options the legend position. So now it's at the bottom of the chart and I want to move it to the right, so I'm gonna click on right, and there we go. Now my legend is at the right of the chart. I can also change the color of the legend, so I'm gonna hit here the fill and line option and I'm gonna click in here the fill option. I can select the solid fill and you can see that now I have blue selected. I'm gonna leave it like that. I'm just gonna make it a little bit more transparent. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at 30% and there we go. The next thing that I want to do for this chart is to select the data labels again. I'm gonna click on any point in them and I want to do the same thing I did on the previous chart. I'm gonna go to the label options and on the label position option I'm gonna click on outside end. So now the labels are at the end of the bars. We can also change the color of the labels. So I can go back to this fill and line option and I'm gonna select the solid fill and I'm gonna choose a black color for these labels. I'm gonna select this one and there we go. So now my sales labels are more visible, and if I want, for this design we want to remove the data labels for the profit margin, because probably too many labels can get a little bit confusing. So I'm gonna select any of the profit margin labels and I'm gonna press the delete button. So there we go. So now I'm done with my second design. So the first thing we want to do for our third design is to change the chart title. So I'm gonna type in here sales and profit margin. Alright, so now I want to select the chart, and as we did with the previous one, I want to go up to the chart design. I'm gonna go to the chart styles section and I'm gonna choose the third design, the style number 3. So now I want to change the color, so I'm gonna click here in the change colors option and I'm gonna select the third one on the colorful palette. There we go. So now I want to change also the font as we did with my previous charts. So I'm gonna go back to the home menu and I'm gonna select the Century Gothic font and there we go. And as we did before, I want to go back to the chart design and I'm gonna change the grid lines because I don't like to see them in here. So I'm gonna click in here again to uncheck this primary major horizontal. Now the next thing that I want to do is that I don't want this legend over here. In fact, I don't want it anywhere. So I'm just gonna delete it. So I'm gonna click in here and I'm gonna hit the delete button so that I have more space in my chart. So now what I want to do is to delete the data labels for the sales because I think there's too much information, and I'm gonna be using this chart mainly for evaluating the profit margin, so I don't need these data labels of the sales. So I'm gonna select them and I'm gonna hit the delete button. So the next thing for this chart is to select the line over here. You can click on any point you like. We're gonna right click again, we're gonna go to the format data series and we're gonna go to this fill and line again, and we want to make sure that we're on the line section. Let's change the dash type of the line. So instead of a straight line, I'm gonna change it to this dash type line. Okay. And now I also want to change the marker of this. I want to go up to the marker section. I'm gonna click on the marker options, and I'm gonna select the built-in option, and I'm gonna click on this one, and it looks a little bit small, so I'm gonna change it to size 7. Okay, and there we go. Now it looks a little bit bigger and it looks a little bit more beautiful. So now I want to do 2 more things before I'm done with this chart, and I can also change the background color of the whole chart. So I'm gonna select it again, and where it says chart options, still on the fill and line, I'm gonna click on solid fill, and as you can see we have changed the color of it. So I'm gonna pick on this light gray, and there we go. The last thing that I want to do is to make some of the items more visible. I just want to change the font to bold. So I'm gonna select the title, I'm gonna go to the font section, and I'm gonna make it bold. I'm gonna do the same thing for all of my sections. So I'm gonna select the left axis, I'm gonna change it to bold. I'm gonna change the right axis to bold as well, the dates as well, and the data labels. I'm gonna select them and make them bold. So now, as you can see, your chart now has a different look. So now for our last design, the first thing that I want to do is to change the chart title. So I'm gonna type in here sales and profit margin. I'm gonna hit enter, and now I'm gonna show you another way to format your chart. So I'm gonna select the whole chart, I'm gonna click it, I'm gonna go to the chart design, and in this section right here in chart layouts, I can select a quick layout. So if I click in here, I'm gonna select this layout number 5. Okay, and now as you can see, there is a table below the chart. So this table has all of the information of my original data, but in this case, if I want to look at it, it's a little bit easier to see all of the data still on the chart. So the next thing that I want to do is to remove the grid lines again. So I'm going to go back to the add chart element, and I'm going to select the grid lines, and I'm going to uncheck this primary major horizontal. And there we go. And now I want to go up to the home menu, and I want to change the font. You can pick any font you want. In this case, I'm going to select the Verdana one. So now, as you can see, I have changed the font of this. But still, as you can see here in the profit margin, I can barely see all of the numbers because of the 0 that is displaying here. So I can change this directly on my data. So I'm going to select from cell D3 down to cell D14. And on the home menu, on the numbers section, I'm going to click on the decrease decimal. Alright, so now my profit margin looks a little bit better. So the next thing that I want to do is, in this layout, I had the axis title, but I don't want it. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to press the delete button. And there we go. So now I want to make this a little bit more pretty. So I'm going to select my line chart. I can click on any point in here. I'm gonna right click for the format data series, and I'm gonna go to the fill and line option. So now I want to set a first point in time of the line. So I can go here to this option that says begin arrow type, and I'm gonna select this circle over here, the oval arrow. So as you can see now, my profit margin starts with an oval in here on the first point. And I can also do that for the last point to indicate that this is gonna continue. So I'm gonna go to the end arrow type, and I'm gonna select any of these arrows. So I'm gonna change this open arrow. So now, as you can see, we have a starting point and a final point on the line chart. So I can also make this line a little bit more curvy. So I'm gonna click in here where it says smoothed line, and now it looks like a little bit more round. And the last thing we're gonna do is to change the width of this line. So now it's at width of 225, and I'm gonna change it up to 4. And there we go. So now we have our last design ready. I hope that video was helpful. If you feel like practicing, you can download the sample file in the description. Also, don't forget to comment, to hit the red button to like and to subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything and you'll be motivating me to upload more tutorials for you. See you next time!